The polished Oxford shoe rose in the air like a war hammer. Crack! The impact was sharp, brutal, merciless. The Italian leather crashed against the man's chest with a force that echoed through the entire church like a gunshot. Jack staggered backward, his arms flailing through the air, seeking balance. His eyes opened in total shock. His 50-year-old body, weathered by work, collapsed like a sack of cement. Crash! His head struck the corner of the marble pew with a sound that chilled the blood. A scarlet thread began running down his temple. His baseball cap flew through the air and landed yards away like a wounded bird. The silence was absolute, deadly. 150 guests held their breath at the same time. Children stopped moving, women brought their hands to their mouths, men stood petrified, but the phones kept recording, red lights blinked from every angle. The moment was captured in high definition. The working man lying on the marble floor, blood staining his white shirt, while the millionaire groom looked down at him with pure contempt. "Dear God!" screamed a woman wearing pearls. "Call an ambulance!" roared a man from the back. Arthur Whitman, heir to a restaurant chain dressed in his $3,000 Hugo Boss suit, stepped back staring at his hands as if they were weapons. His breathing quickened. The world seemed to move in slow motion, and then, from the back of the church came a scream that tore the soul of everyone present. "Daddy!" Luna appeared running like an apparition, her wedding dress flowing like the wings of a fallen angel. She dropped beside the unconscious man, her trembling hands touching his bloodied face. "Daddy, no. Please, look at me." What no one knew was who that man lying unconscious on the marble floor really was. What no one knew was that they had just witnessed the moment that would change everything forever. Now we go back 30 minutes to the moment where this nightmare began. The afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church, creating patches of color on the white marble altar. The scent of incense mixed with white roses floated in the warm air. The wooden pews gleamed with freshly applied varnish. It was the perfect day for a perfect wedding. Arthur adjusted his Italian silk tie while checking his reflection in the vestibule mirror. His Oxford shoes reflected the chandelier lights. At 26, he was the definition of success. Perfect face, sculpted in expensive gyms, and a smile that had conquered Luna Morrison 3 years earlier. The guests began to arrive, men in designer suits, women in dresses that cost more than many people's monthly salary. The murmur of conversations filled the main nave. Then he saw him. A man around 50 years old was approaching down the center aisle. His clothes were clean but worn, faded denim pants, white shirt with small stains, work boots with worn soles. His calloused hands held a used baseball cap. The murmurs ceased. Glances pierced him like daggers. "Who is that guy?" whispered a woman. "Looks like he got lost," another responded. Jack Morrison advanced to the third row and stopped beside the pew. An older couple looked at him with evident disgust. "Excuse me," he said with a rough but firm voice. "I think this is my seat." "There must be a mistake," the woman responded with an icy voice. "These seats are reserved for family." "I am family," Jack said simply. That's when Arthur exploded. He crossed the main nave with long, furious steps, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "Hey, you!" he shouted. "Get out of here!" "I'm not causing trouble," Jack said. "I just came to my daughter's wedding." "Your daughter?" Arthur let out a bitter laugh. "Luna doesn't have a father. She told me clearly." "She has a father," Jack murmured. "She always has." "Liar!" Arthur roared. "You're a bum who snuck in here thinking you could get something." The phones began to appear. The recording started. "I'm going to give you 5 seconds to disappear from my sight," Arthur hissed. 5, 4, 3. Jack didn't move. His eyes remained serene but firm. 2, 1. And then came the moment we already know. The moment that would go viral. The moment that would change everything. If this story has already touched your heart in this first minute, subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find stories that heal, inspire, and make you believe in human goodness again. The video appeared on social media before the ambulance arrived at the church. "Millionaire groom attacks homeless man at his own wedding" was the first headline. Then came the others. "Cruelty live. When money can't buy humanity, the most hated groom of the year." In 6 hours, the video had accumulated 500,000 views. In 12 hours, 2 million. The hashtags #CruelGroom, #Justice for Jack, and Wedding from Hell became worldwide trends. Arthur found himself in his luxury apartment, curtains drawn, phone ringing non-stop. He had disconnected the doorbell after the 5th journalist knocked on his door. His hands trembled as he held a glass of whiskey he couldn't bring to his lips. On his television screen, his own face appeared over and over. The moment of the kick was repeated in slow motion. His expression of pure hatred was immortalized in high definition. "Young Arthur Whitman," said the news anchor, heir to the Real Taste restaurant chain, starred yesterday in one of the most deplorable scenes ever seen in a religious ceremony. Morrison. The surname hammered in his head like an echo. 3 soft knocks on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Luna. Her wedding dress had been replaced by jeans and a simple t-shirt. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur opened the door and she entered without looking at him. She sat on the Italian leather sofa, hands clasped on her lap. "How is he?" Arthur asked, not daring to approach. "Conscious. 12 stitches. Mild concussion," Luna responded with a mechanical voice. "The doctors say he was lucky." The silence stretched between them like an abyss. "Luna, I didn't know he was your father. You never told me that." "That I had a father?" Luna looked up, her eyes shining with contained tears. "That my dad worked as a construction worker? That he lived in a 2-room house in the working-class neighborhood?" Arthur opened his mouth to respond, but found no words. "I lied to you," Luna continued, her voice breaking. "I told you I was an orphan because I was ashamed of his worn clothes, of his calloused hands, of the way he spoke, ashamed that my rich friends would see him and know where I really come from." Tears ran down her cheeks like rivers of guilt. "I've spent 3 years denying my own father to fit into your world, and you kicked him for being exactly what I was trying to hide." Arthur approached, extending his hand toward her, but Luna stepped back. "Don't touch me, not until we know who you really are." "I'm the man who loves you, Luna. I made a terrible mistake, but—" "A mistake?" Luna stood up, her voice rising. "Kicking a defenseless man in a church is a mistake? Humiliating someone for their appearance is a mistake?" Arthur felt the ground move under his feet. "What do you want me to do? What can I do to fix it?" Luna looked at him with a mixture of pain and determination he had never seen before. "My father doesn't want your money. He doesn't want your empty apologies. He says if you really love me, if you really want to marry me, you'll have to prove with actions who you are." "How?" Luna walked toward the door but stopped before leaving. "Tomorrow at 5 in the morning. St. Paul Construction, mile 12 of North Highway. If you really love me, if you really want a second chance, you'll be there." The door closed with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything Arthur had known. But what was coming would change his life forever. The alarm clock showed 4:30 a.m. when Arthur opened his eyes. He hadn't slept. His gym and spa body had never known a working dawn. His muscles, accustomed to state-of-the-art machines and personal trainers, protested when he sat up. St. Paul Construction was exactly what he expected. A concrete skeleton surrounded by dirt, yellow machines covered in dust, and the penetrating smell of fresh cement. Workers in hard hats and reflective vests were already moving among the structures like organized ants. Arthur arrived in his black BMW. The contrast was brutal, his German car gleaming next to the rusty pickup trucks and workers' bicycles. Jack stood beside a makeshift table, reviewing blueprints with other men. A white bandage covered the wound on his temple. His movements were careful but firm. When he saw Arthur arrive, he dismissed his companions with a wave of his hand. "I thought you wouldn't come," Jack said, without a trace of resentment in his voice. "I'm here," Arthur replied, trying to sound confident while his Italian shoes sank into the mud. Jack studied him with eyes that had seen too much of the world. 40 years of work under the sun had carved deep lines in his face, but his eyes maintained a clarity that Arthur envied without knowing it. "Do you know why I asked you to come here and not to my house?" Arthur shook his head. "Because this is where things that last are built, not with money, not with contacts, with work, sweat, and respect." Jack pointed toward the growing structure. "See that column over there? We made it with my own hands 2 weeks ago. It'll be there when we're gone." A group of workers passed nearby, greeting Jack with genuine smiles. "Good morning, Mr. Jack." "How are you, boss?" Their voices carried real respect, earned day by day. "My daughter loves you," Jack continued. "I don't understand why after what happened, but she loves you, and for that and only for that I'm going to give you a chance you don't deserve." Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. 90 days, Jack said, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. 90 days working here, with me, from sun to sun. You'll learn what it means to earn money with your hands. You'll know the value of honest work. 90 days. Arthur couldn't hide his surprise. "I have responsibilities, my father's company. If you fail a single day, if you're late even once, if you complain or try to bribe me to end this early, there'll be no wedding. Luna will leave your life forever." The silence between them filled with the roar of machines and workers' shouts coordinating a beam. "And if I complete the 90 days?" Jack smiled for the first time. It was a sad but hopeful smile. "If you complete them, if you really change, if you prove you deserve my daughter, you'll have my blessing." He extended his calloused hand toward Arthur. "Deal?" Arthur looked at the extended hand. He had never made a deal without lawyers, without papers, without escape clauses. Just the word of a man who had worked his entire life with honor. He shook Jack's hand. The difference was notable, his own soft and cared-for hands against the rough skin and scars of decades of labor. "Deal." "Perfect." Jack headed toward a tool shed. "We start now, and Arthur—" He turned, his eyes piercing Arthur's like daggers of truth. "See you at 5, if you're really worth anything." The first day, Arthur thought he would die. His hands, accustomed only to signing checks and holding crystal glasses, filled with blisters after 2 hours mixing cement. His back, molded in luxury gyms but never subjected to real work, contracted in painful spasms while carrying 50-pound bags. The midday sun fell like hammers on his head. His Ralph Lauren polo shirt soaked with sweat until it became transparent. His designer athletic shoes disintegrated in the mud and debris. "Faster, pretty boy!" shouted Ramon, a 60-year-old worker with arms like tree trunks. "There's no air conditioning or maids here." The other workers laughed. It wasn't cruelty. It was the way they welcomed all rookies. But for Arthur, accustomed to being treated like a prince, each laugh was a stab. On the third day, he tried to bribe Jack. "Look," he said, pulling out his wallet during lunch break, "I have $5,000 here. They're yours if we say the 90 days passed." Jack didn't even look at the money. He continued eating his homemade ham sandwich, sitting on a concrete block. "Put that away," he said simply. "It doesn't work here." On the 10th day, Arthur tried to skip work. He stayed in bed, pretending to be sick. His phone rang at 5:05 a.m. "Where are you?" Luna asked. "I can't anymore, Luna. Everything hurts. This is inhumane." "My father has been doing this every day for 40 years, she responded, her voice cold as ice. "And you can't handle 10 days? "It's different. He was born for this. I have other responsibilities." "You have a responsibility to me, and you're losing it." Arthur arrived at the construction site at 6:30 a.m. Jack said nothing about the delay, but that afternoon he assigned him the heaviest tasks, carrying bricks under the midday sun. On the 20th day, something began to change. His hands no longer bled. The blisters had become calluses. His muscles, sore but stronger, had adapted to the rhythm of real work. For the first time in his life, the exhaustion at the end of the day made sense. It was the exhaustion of having built something. On the 30th day, the other workers stopped calling him Pretty Boy. Now he was simply Arthur. He had proven he could keep up the pace, that he wouldn't complain, that he wouldn't give up. On the 40th day, he began to understand the conversations. The workers talked about their families, about children studying thanks to their work, about houses they built with their own hands on weekends. They talked about dignity in a language Arthur had never heard in exclusive clubs. "Do you know what's the hardest thing about this job?" Jack asked him one afternoon while they cleaned tools. "The heat? The weight? The invisibility," Jack smiled sadly. "People see the buildings, the roads, the bridges, but they never see the men who built them. To them, we're ghosts." Arthur remembered all the times he had passed construction sites without even noticing the workers. To him, they had been part of the landscape, like trees or rocks. On the 60th day, Arthur witnessed something that changed everything. An elegant man, owner of a BMW similar to his, came to inspect the work progress. He was a client of the construction company, an investor reviewing his project. Ramon approached to give him a report on materials. His dirty hands held a folder with the requested documents. "Don't touch me," the elegant man growled, stepping back as if Ramon had a contagious disease. "And don't breathe so close to me." Arthur froze. It was like seeing himself in a mirror of the past. Ramon lowered his head, humiliated. His companions looked away. The humiliation floated in the air like toxic gas. The elegant man continued inspecting the work, making contemptuous comments about these workers and their lack of education. Arthur felt something explode in his chest. It wasn't anger, it was something deeper. It was recognition. He approached the elegant man with determined steps. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but controlled. The man turned, noticing Arthur's presence for the first time. His work clothes were dirty, but there was something in his posture that demanded attention. "What do you want?" "I want you to apologize to Ramon." The man burst into laughter. "Apologize? To a construction worker?" "To a man," Arthur corrected. "To a man who has spent 30 years building this city while others only inhabit it." The silence fell over the work site like a heavy blanket. All the workers had stopped moving. Jack watched from afar, holding his breath. "Who the hell do you think you are?" the elegant man growled. "Someone who is learning," Arthur replied. "And the first thing I learned is that respect can't be bought. It's earned." But the real test was yet to come. There was only one day left to complete the 90, and Jack had serious doubts. Day 89 dawned grey. Heavy clouds loaded with rain covered the sky like a lead blanket. The air smelled of storm and wet concrete. Workers moved faster, trying to make progress before the first drops fell. Arthur arrived at 4:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. His hands, now weathered and strong, carried tools without thinking. His movements had the efficiency that only comes from days of repetitive practice. He was no longer the same man who had arrived almost 3 months ago. His body had lost the softness of the gym and gained the solidity of real work. His face, bronzed by the construction site sun, showed lines that hadn't been there before. His eyes had changed most of all. They no longer had that empty look of privilege, but the depth of someone who had seen the world from below. "One more day," Jack told him while they reviewed the work agenda. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Arthur admitted. "But it's a different tiredness. It's satisfying." Jack nodded. He had observed the transformation day by day. The arrogant young man who kicked a man in a church had given way to someone who understood the value of honest sweat. "Have you thought about what you'll do tomorrow?" It was a loaded question. Tomorrow would be day 91, the first day of the rest of his life. "I've thought a lot," Arthur replied, looking toward the structure they had raised together. "I don't want to go back to being who I was before." The rain began to fall at midday, thick drops that became streams down the workers' hard hats. The worksite filled with puddles and slippery mud. The work pace slowed, but didn't stop. That's when Mr. Mitchell arrived. Edward Mitchell owned 3 construction companies and was known for his despotic treatment of employees. His arrival always generated tension. Workers knew he came to pressure, to demand, to humiliate. He got out of his armored truck like a general inspecting defeated troops. His grey suit remained dry under an umbrella held by his assistant. His shoes shone like mirrors despite the mud. "This work is behind schedule," he shouted before even reviewing the blueprints. "Where's the person in charge?" Jack approached, walking slowly through the puddles. "We're within the timeline, Mr. Mitchell. This week's rain delayed us a bit, but—" "I don't want excuses," Mitchell interrupted. "I want results." He approached Jack until they were face to face. The contrast was brutal, the impeccable businessman against the soaked worker. "Maybe if you hired competent workers instead of these larvae—" "They're the best men I've worked with," Jack interrupted, his voice firm but respectful. "The best?" Mitchell burst into laughter that cut through the air like a whip. "Look at this mess. Look at this bunch of useless, soaked rats." He extended his hand and pushed Jack in the chest, making him step back. "You're nothing more than tools. Cheap tools that can be replaced when they break." Jack staggered but maintained his dignity. His eyes showed pain, but he didn't respond. 40 years of work had taught him that some insults had to be endured to feed the family. The other workers lowered their gaze. Ramon clenched his fists, but knew he couldn't risk his job. He had 3 children in college. Arthur observed the scene from 20 yards away. The rainwater ran down his face, mixing with tears he didn't know were falling. It was his moment, his real test. He approached walking slowly, his work boots splashing in the puddles. His breathing accelerated, but not from fear. It was something different. It was pure determination. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice cutting through the rain. The businessman turned, noticing Arthur for the first time. "What do you want, worker?" "I want you to apologize to Mr. Jack." Mitchell studied Arthur with shark eyes. It was evident he didn't recognize him from the wedding scandal. To him, all workers were interchangeable. "Apologize? Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Arthur replied, approaching until they were face to face. "You're a man who believes money gives you the right to humiliate others." The silence was absolute. Even the rain seemed to soften. "Mr. Jack has spent 40 years building this city," Arthur continued. "He has raised buildings that will last centuries. He has raised a family with honor. He has earned the respect of every man here with honest work." His voice rose, charged with conviction. "And what have you built? What do you leave the world besides humiliations and contempt?" Mitchell stepped back, surprised by Arthur's intensity. "Do you know what speaking to me like this can cost you?" "It can cost me my job," Arthur replied, "but there are things worth more than the job. Dignity is one of them." He turned toward his fellow workers. "All of you!" he shouted, his voice resonating above the roar of machines. "You are the builders of dreams, the architects of reality. Without you, this city would be just empty land." The workers raised their heads for the first time, their backs straightened. A dignity that had been trampled for years began to flourish again. Mitchell looked around, feeling how the atmosphere had changed. They were no longer intimidated workers. They were men united by recovered dignity. "This won't stay like this," he muttered, backing toward his truck. "Yes, it will stay like this," Arthur replied, because true respect is not negotiable. When Mitchell's truck disappeared in the distance, the workers approached Arthur. Ramon was the first to extend his hand. "Thank you, brother." "Thank you," Arthur replied, "for teaching me what it really means to be a man." Jack watched from afar, with tears mixing with rain on his weathered face. That night, Arthur did something he had never done in his life. He asked for forgiveness in public. He uploaded a video to his social media, not in his luxury apartment, but at the construction site, with his soaked work clothes, with mud on his boots, and humility in his eyes. "My name is Arthur Whitman," he began, looking directly at the camera. "90 days ago, I committed the most cowardly act of my life. I kicked an honest man in a church just because of his appearance." His voice broke slightly. "I didn't know he was my father-in-law, but that doesn't matter. It would have been wrong regardless of who he was. That man, Jack Morrison, taught me what it means to work with honor. He taught me that true wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you build." The video went viral within hours. The same hashtags that had destroyed him now carried a different message: Chaming second chance, cha dignitary work, respect recovered. But there was one day left to complete the 90, and Jack had one last conversation that would change everything forever. Day 90 arrived with a golden dawn. There were no clouds in the sky. The air smelled of dry cement and new possibilities. Arthur arrived at 4:30 a.m., half an hour earlier than required. His hands no longer trembled from nervousness, but from anticipation. He had completed 89 days. Only one remained. But when he arrived at the construction site, Jack wasn't there. Instead, he found a note taped to the tool shed. 47B Maple Street, Hope District. Come alone. The neighborhood where Jack lived was a different world from what Arthur had known all his life. Small block houses, painted in bright colors. Little gardens with plants cared for with love, but without resources. Children playing soccer in the street with a patched ball. The smell of fresh casseroles floating from kitchens. 47B Maple Street was modest but impeccable. The walls were painted mint green, Luna's favorite color as he vaguely remembered. A small garden with red roses and white geraniums decorated the front. Jack opened the door before Arthur could knock. He wore his Sunday clothes, dress pants carefully pressed, white shirt and polished shoes. His hair, always messy from the hard hat, was combed back. "Come in," he said simply. The interior of the house was a testament to decades of honest work. Simple but well-cared-for furniture, family photographs in cheap but polished frames, the smell of fresh coffee and flowers. Luna sat on the worn fabric sofa. She wore a simple blue dress, no makeup, hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had never been more beautiful. "Sit down," Jack said, pointing to a wooden chair in front of the sofa. Arthur sat, feeling the weight of 90 days of transformation on his shoulders. He was no longer the man who had entered that church with arrogance. Nor was he the same one who had started working at the construction site out of obligation. He was someone new, forged in sweat and humility. "Today marks 90 days, Jack began, serving 3 cups of coffee in mismatched cups. "You've worked hard. You've shown you can change." Arthur nodded, not trusting his voice. "But before giving you my blessing, I need you to answer some questions, with absolute honesty." Luna straightened on the sofa, her eyes identical to her father's, fixed on Arthur. "First question," Jack said. "Why did you complete the 90 days? Arthur breathed deeply. It was the question he had asked himself every dawn for 3 months. At first, it was for Luna. I wanted to get her back. I wanted the wedding to go ahead. His voice sounded hoarse, charged with honesty. But later it was for me, because I discovered that the man I was before didn't deserve Luna, didn't deserve anything. Second question, what did you learn? I learned that respect isn't inherited, it's earned, that dignity doesn't depend on your bank account, that there's a huge difference between having money and having value. Arthur looked directly at Jack. I learned that you are richer than I'll ever be because you build things that last. Luna brought a hand to her mouth, containing a sob. Third question, Jack's voice softened. What are you going to do with what you learned? This was the most important question. Arthur knew it. I don't want to go back to my father's restaurants. I don't want to keep living off money I didn't earn. He leaned forward. I want to build something. I want to use my privilege to help others find dignified work. He stood up, walking to the window that faced the backyard. Jack had built a small deck with his own hands. Every board was perfectly aligned, every nail placed with precision. I want to create a program where young people like me, young people lost in privilege, can learn what I learned. 90 days of real work, 90 days of understanding that the world owes them nothing. Luna stood up, her eyes shining. Are you serious? Completely serious. Arthur turned toward her. And I want you to direct it. You know both worlds. You can be the bridge. Jack approached slowly. His steps echoed on the ceramic floor. And us? Luna asked, her voice barely a whisper. What happens with us? Arthur took her hands. For the first time in 3 months, he allowed himself to touch her. I want to marry you. But not in a church full of people only looking for spectacle. I want a simple wedding, with the people who really matter, with your father walking you down the aisle, with the men who taught me what it means to work. Luna began to cry. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of recovered hope. Dad was right, she murmured. He had to know your heart before knowing your wallet. I also have a confession, Luna said, wiping away her tears. I've carried your surname with shame for years. I lied about you, Dad. I told my friends you had died because I was embarrassed that they'd know you worked with your hands. Jack hugged her, his voice breaking. Sweetheart, I knew. I always knew. But I hoped that someday you'd realize that honest work isn't a reason for shame, but for pride. The three embraced in the small living room of 47B Maple Street. It was an embrace that healed years of wounds, that built bridges over chasms of misunderstandings. So do I have your blessing? Arthur asked when they separated. Jack smiled, the first complete smile Arthur had seen on his lips. You've had it since day 60, when you defended Ramon. From that moment I knew you had found your heart. He paused. But I had to be sure it wasn't just to fulfill a deal. It wasn't. I know. Jack extended his calloused hand. Welcome to the family, son. The final embrace between father-in-law and son-in-law sealed not only a reconciliation, but the birth of something much bigger, a new way of understanding success and happiness. 5 years later, St. Michael's Church filled again for a wedding. But this time it was different. The pews were occupied by a unique mix, businessmen in expensive suits sitting next to workers in their best Sunday clothes, women with diamond jewelry conversing with workers' wives dressed with simple dignity. Arthur waited at the altar, but he was no longer the same man from 5 years ago. His suit was elegant but not ostentatious. His hands showed calluses he had never completely lost. His posture had the solidity of someone who had learned the value of real work. Beside him, as best man, stood Ramon. The 60-year-old worker wore a new suit that Arthur had insisted on buying him, not as charity, but as a gift from one brother to another. Nervous? Ramon asked with a smile. Calm, Arthur replied. This time I know exactly who I'm marrying. The music began to play. The church doors opened. Luna appeared radiant in a simple white lace dress, without the excessive pomp of 5 years ago. Her beauty shone from within, illuminated by the peace of someone who had learned to love without shame. But the most beautiful moment was seeing Jack walk her down the aisle. The 55-year-old man had aged gracefully. His hair showed more grey, but his eyes shone with pure pride. He wore a simple but impeccable suit, ironed by himself the night before. His shoes, polished until they shone like mirrors, stepped on the same marble where 5 years before he had fallen humiliated. The transformation was complete. When they reached the altar, Jack didn't just give away his daughter's hand. He hugged Arthur like the son he never had, but had forged with patience and wisdom. "Take care of her," he murmured in his ear. "With my life," Arthur replied. Pastor Williams, the same minister who had stopped the first ceremony, smiled as he began the liturgy. "Dear brothers, we gather here not only to celebrate the love between Arthur and Luna, but to witness that second chances exist when there is true repentance and honest work." During the vows, Arthur spoke with a clear voice. "Luna, 5 years ago I failed you in the cruelest way possible. I humiliated the man you love most because of my own ignorance and arrogance. Today I promise you that the man who woke up that day in the hospital no longer exists. In his place is someone who knows that true love requires respect, humility, and courage to grow." Luna responded with tears of joy running down her cheeks. "Arthur, you taught me that people can change when they're willing to work for it. Today, I promise you that I'll never again be ashamed of my origin, because my origin is beautiful. It's honest work, true love, and dignity earned through effort." When the pastor declared them husband and wife, the church exploded in applause. But it wasn't society applause, it was community applause, from an extended family that included workers, businessmen, and all who had witnessed a real transformation. 3 years later, the 90 Days Foundation occupied a 3-story building in the city center. On the entrance plaque, engraved in bronze, it read, "Where privilege learns to serve." Arthur walked through the workshops reviewing the progress of the young people in the program. Each of them came from wealthy families, but all had arrived there for the same reason. They had lost their way in lives of ease and needed to find their purpose. "How's Michael doing?" Arthur asked Jack, who directed the carpentry workshop. "Stubborn as a mule, but he's learning," Jack replied, watching a 19-year-old boy sand a board with determination. Yesterday, he defended another companion when an outside supervisor made fun of his work. It was always the same pattern. They arrived arrogant, went through the humiliation of real work, hit bottom, found their dignity, learned respect, and left transformed. In 8 years, more than 300 young people had gone through the program. Most had returned to their previous lives, but with a completely different perspective. "Daddy," said a small voice from the workshop door. Arthur turned to see his 4-year-old son, Jack Arthur Morrison, running toward him with denim overalls and a toy hard hat. "Can I work with you today?" "Of course, little builder," Arthur replied, lifting him in his arms. Luna appeared behind, carrying their 2-year-old daughter, Mary Hope. The girl had her grandfather's chocolate eyes and her mother's luminous smile. That night, the family dined at 47B Maple Street. Jack had refused to move to a bigger house. "This house has soul," he had said. "Here I learned to be a father. Here Luna learned to walk. Here you learned to be a man. Why would I change it?" During dinner, little Jack asked, "Grandpa, why did Daddy work with you at the construction site?" Jack looked at Arthur, who nodded. It was time for the new generations to know the story. "Your daddy was lost, son," Jack began. "He had a lot of money, but didn't know what it was for. He thought with money he could buy respect, but respect can't be bought, it's earned. And how do you earn it? With honest work, by treating people well, by helping those who need help." Jack put his calloused hand on the boy's little head. "Your daddy learned that working with me, and now he teaches other lost kids to find their way." At the end of the night, while helping Jack wash dishes, his father-in-law told him something that would remain engraved forever. "Do you know what your greatest transformation was, son?" "What?" "It wasn't learning to work with your hands. It was learning to see with your heart." Jack dried a plate carefully. "The day you defended Ramon, that day you stopped being the spoiled groom and became a man. Warm. They embraced in the small kitchen, surrounded by the aroma of coffee and the warmth of a true home. 10 years later, Jack Morrison, now 65, walked slowly through the city's largest construction site. He no longer worked actively, but supervised as a senior consultant. He stopped in front of a bronze plaque installed at the main entrance of the building. Jack Morrison Educational Center, where honest work forges character, founded by the 90 Days Foundation. And below, engraved in golden letters, the phrase that had become the motto of a transformation: respect is the true foundation. Without it, nothing stands. This story reminds us that real transformation is possible when we're willing to work for it. That respect doesn't depend on what you have, but on how you treat others. And that second chances, when properly used, can change not just one life, but entire generations. Comment from which country you're watching us and which part of this story made you reflect. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to change. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve a second chance to be the best version of ourselves.